Most people approach the side hustle decision the way they approach most decisions about things they haven't done before. They look for what seems accessible, what other people are doing, what appears to be working right now, what feels like a reasonable place to start. And they start there, without examining what that starting point means for where they can go. Because the first decision isn't just the first decision. It's the structural foundation on which everything that follows gets built. The market entered, the skills deployed, the model chosen. All of it compounds forward in the same direction from the moment the decision is made. The compounding works in both directions. A side hustle started in the right market, one with real demand, reasonable margins, and a clear path to differentiation, compounds toward a real income stream. Each client adds credibility. Each delivery improves the process. Each dollar of revenue funds the next layer of building. A side hustle started in the wrong market, oversaturated, underpaying, with no path to differentiation, compounds toward a ceiling that never gets higher. More effort, more hours, the same structural result. Because the market was always the constraint, not the execution inside it. The specific elements of the first decision that determine the trajectory are three: market selection, skill alignment, model structure. Market selection determines who the potential customers are, how many of them exist, what they will pay, and how crowded the competitive landscape is. Skill alignment determines how quickly real value can be delivered, which determines how quickly the hustle generates income and how credibly it can compete. Model structure determines whether the hustle has a ceiling built into it from the start, or whether it's structured in a way that can evolve towards something scalable. Most people examine none of these before starting. They see something working for someone else. They identify a platform or a format. They start producing. And they discover, months later, that the market is oversaturated, that the rate it pays doesn't justify the effort, that the model they chose requires their presence for every dollar it generates. Not because they weren't capable, because the structural analysis wasn't done before the commitment was made. The first decision set the trajectory, and the trajectory was already pointing toward a ceiling before the first hour of work was done. This doesn't mean the first decision has to be perfect. It rarely is. Markets are discovered through participation. Skill fits are discovered through delivery. Model limitations are discovered through operation. But the investor who examines the structure of what they're entering, even imperfectly, even with limited information, makes a better first decision than the one who doesn't examine it at all. And a better first decision starts the compounding in a direction that produces more over the same period of time with the same effort. The decision is the leverage point. Everything after it is execution inside the structure it created. Every few years, a new category of side hustle gets significant attention. A format that's working, a platform that's paying well, a model that seems to produce disproportionate returns for the people doing it. And a wave of people enters that category, drawn by the visibility of the results, by the content documenting those results, by the apparent accessibility of something that's clearly working for people who don't seem dramatically different from themselves. This is the trend cycle, and it consistently produces the wrong starting point for the people who follow it. The reason comes down to timing. The people generating the results that attract attention to a category are almost always the early participants. They entered the market when the competition was thin, when the platform was actively promoting new participants, when the early mover advantage was producing returns that reflected scarcity, not capability. By the time the results are visible enough to attract a wave of followers, By the time the content documenting those results has been seen widely enough to change behavior, the market has changed. More participants have entered. The platform has shifted its algorithm. The early mover advantage has eroded. The returns available to new entrants are lower than the returns that attracted them in the first place. The trend follower enters at the wrong point in the cycle, not at the beginning, when scarcity produced outsized returns. At the peak, when visibility is highest, competition is most intense, and the returns available are the lowest they've been since the category emerged. This pattern repeats across every category of side hustle that has gone through a trend cycle. Dropshipping, print on demand, YouTube, podcasting, newsletter writing, short-form video. Each category went through a period where early participants generated returns that seemed extraordinary. Each category attracted followers at the point where those returns were no longer accessible to new entrants in the same way. The structural problem with trend following isn't that these categories don't work. They do work. People build real businesses in all of them. The problem is that trend following puts new entrants in competition with established participants who have more content, more audience, more trust, and who built those assets during the period when the market rewarded early participation. The new entrant is competing against people who had a structural head start, and doing so in a market that is more crowded than it was when that head start was built. The odds aren't impossible, but they're significantly worse than they were for the people whose results attracted the entrant in the first place. The alternative isn't avoiding new categories. It's selecting based on structural fit, not on what's generating attention right now. A category entered early, before the trend cycle peaks, because it aligns with existing skills and addresses real unsolved demand, produces different outcomes than a category entered late because the results looked compelling. The former is a structural decision. The latter is a reactive one. And reactive decisions, made in response to what's visible now, almost always arrive after the structural advantage has already been captured by the people who decided earlier. If this made sense to you, you already understand more than most people do. This channel exists for that kind of awareness. Like the video, subscribe. Nothing here is accidental. Most people approaching a side hustle look outward for the answer. What's working in the market? What skills are in demand? What categories seem to be producing results for people who look like them? And they overlook the most obvious starting point: what they already know. The fastest path to a viable side income runs through existing expertise. Not because new skills can't be learned, not because unfamiliar categories can't be entered, but because existing expertise solves the hardest problem in the early stage of any side hustle: credibility. The earliest stage of building a side income requires convincing someone, a client, a customer, a buyer, to pay for something from someone with no track record. Existing expertise dramatically shortens the credibility building period. A person with 10 years of experience in a specific domain already has the knowledge, the vocabulary, the judgment, and the pattern recognition that a buyer in that domain will pay for. Most people underestimate the market value of what they already know, because expertise is invisible from the inside. What feels routine to a professional who has spent years developing a specific capability is genuinely valuable to someone who doesn't have it. The accountant who has navigated a specific type of tax situation 100 times has knowledge that most small business owners would pay meaningfully for. The project manager who has built complex cross-functional processes has a framework that consultants sell. The HR professional who knows how to structure a hiring process has knowledge that founders consistently get wrong and pay for help with. In each case, the knowledge exists. The market for it exists. What doesn't exist yet is the structure that connects the two. Building that structure is the actual work of starting, not learning something new, not entering an unfamiliar market, not acquiring skills the hustle requires. Packaging what already exists in a form the market can access and pay for. A service offering built around the existing expertise, a productized version of what the professional already does, a course or framework that teaches what the professional already knows. The starting point is already there. Most people walk past it on their way to looking for something else. The reason existing expertise gets overlooked is familiarity. What you know feels ordinary to you. It doesn't feel like something worth paying for. Because you've known it so long, it no longer registers as unusual. But value isn't determined by how familiar something is to the provider. It's determined by how valuable it is to the buyer. And the buyer, the small business owner, the entrepreneur, the professional in a different field, doesn't have what you have. What feels routine to you is a genuine gap for them, and people pay to close genuine gaps. The most underutilized asset in most side hustle decisions is the expertise the person already has, already owns, already spent years building, and consistently walks past on the way to finding something new. Two people, same skills, same work ethic, same hours invested, different markets. After 2 years, they're in completely different positions, not because one worked harder, not because one was more capable, because the market one entered was structured differently from the other. And market structure compounds forward from the first day in exactly the same way that any other compounding mechanism does. Markets differ across several structural dimensions. Size. How many potential buyers exist? How large is the pool of people who have the problem the hustle solves? Willingness to pay. Not just whether the problem exists, but whether the people who have it are accustomed to paying for solutions. A market full of people with a genuine problem who have never paid for a solution and don't expect to is a structurally different market from one where paying for solutions is standard practice. Competition. How many other providers are offering roughly the same solution? How established they are? How hard it is to differentiate? The willingness to pay dimension is the one most commonly underestimated. Most side hustle selection is based on whether the problem is real, not on whether the market is conditioned to pay. A problem is real if people genuinely experience it. A market pays if people are accustomed to exchanging money for solutions to that problem. These are different things, and the gap between them is where many hustles fail. A side hustle serving a market that has the problem but not the payment habit spends most of its time educating the market about paying rather than delivering the solution. A side hustle serving a market where payment for this type of solution is standard spends its time competing on quality and positioning, not on convincing people that paying is appropriate. The second market is structurally easier to operate in, even if the first market is larger. Competition density matters for the same compounding reason. A less competitive market allows differentiation to happen faster. The hustle doesn't need to be exceptional. It needs to be clearly better than the alternatives. In a crowded market, where many providers are offering similar things, differentiation requires being significantly better, or significantly cheaper, or occupying a specific niche narrow enough to escape the competition. All of which takes longer, costs more, produces results more slowly. The same capability that would be the obvious choice in a less competitive market becomes one option among many in an oversaturated one. Market selection isn't the only variable. Execution matters. Skills matter. Positioning matters. But market selection is the structural foundation on which everything else operates. The best execution in the wrong market produces worse results than adequate execution in the right one, because the market determines what's possible, not just what's accessible. And the hustle owner who selects the market deliberately, who asks not just what they can do, but where what they can do is most valued, most needed, and most paid for, starts the compounding in a direction that the trend follower or the familiarity-driven selector almost never reaches from the same effort. If this landed differently than you expected, subscribe. Like this if it reframed something.